Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. We're delighted for you to join us here at the Food for Thought today. Today, we're making bytes. But, we are a food, land, and water system. So are we talking about bytes as in food, or are we talking about bytes from a digital and data perspective? Indeed, it's the second one. And our big question here today is with Brian and Jiawu is, can we deliver on our strategy without digital and data? What does it mean for us? So please join us for the next half hour. We'll discuss with Brian and Jiawu what this necessarily means. Now, first is first, if you're joining us from different locations, you can use the French or Spanish interpretation, which is available here on Zoom at the button at the bottom of the screen. And please put any of your Q&A into the question box. We'll be monitoring that as we go. And thank you to those of you who already submitted some of your questions. We've been feverishly working on them in the meantime. Now, a recording will be made available of this webinar who cannot make it. And also to let you know, this webinar will be shared outside our organization to, for example, the Asian Development Bank Institute and other organizations that are very interested to understand our scientific opinion in this area. So let's get going. I'm delighted to join you today. My name is Alyssa J. McDonald-Bertel, and I am System Board Member of the CGIAR. What really concerns us now is how the global food system that we are in faces very complex and interlinked challenges. These include, as you know, the changing climate, the potentially catastrophic biodiversity loss, and a degradation of land and water systems. And even as humanity and our work struggles to respond, we have things like the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got the recent devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and rampant inflation, which is disrupting value chains worldwide. But here's the question. Data and digital technologies could be a key that we could equip our global food system with insights, with agility, and with capacity for the adaptation that it needs to mitigate some of these risks I just mentioned, and really fully realize the potential of what we can do with food, land, and water system science. Now, many of you know in the 2030 Research and Innovation Strategy from the CGIAR, we specifically mentioned the potential of the digital revolution. We specifically wrote into that strategy that we will make it central to our way of working, and that digital and data innovation is central to our operations, essential for conducting research, and needs to be effective to create positive change in even more digitized global economies and societies. So if this is so important to our strategy, and this is so important to our world, I'm really grateful that we've got two colleagues here joining us in the webinar that can help us unpack what that means for us. Jiawu Ku, thank you very much for joining us from the International Food Policy Research Institute, as you are the lead of the Digital Innovation Initiative. And thank you, Brian King, for joining us from the Alliance Bioversity CIAT as the Digital and Data Unit of the System Organization and the former leader of the CGIAR platform for big data in agriculture. I can't think of any two researchers to have first at this table. Thanks for joining us today.
Sure.
Excellent. So, gentlemen, what is the standout experience that we at the CGIAR have with digital in food, land, and water science?
I can have a go at that. Jiawu and I both were involved in the platform for big data, and so far as I know, I've been in the system really. I came to that role. It was the first time in which we looked at our science infrastructure, our data standards, and our data sharing, our data policies, and then looked at how do we partner around use of data and digital in research and in impact of our research. And the first time that we started looking in a cross-cutting way about how do we source, foster, and set on a path to scale digital innovations in how we do what we call research delivery. And so, I think the standout for me from that experience is how much great digital work exists across our organizations and how important it is to start to coalesce and coordinate a bit more so we can claim the sort of full power of that diversity. across our organization. And so the platform evaluation recommended that those basic kind of directions continue, and also noted, similar to the evaluations of the CRPs, the CGIAR research programs, that the ability to work across domains, integrate better across domains, build our modeling capabilities across domains will be pretty fundamental going forward, and I think a key set of tools for implementing our strategy.
Oh. Okay, this certainly indicates the opportunities for where we can go further forward based on these lessons of the last. And what I understand is also, it's not just interesting for us, Brian, but also we've had requests outside the CGIAR to also understand our perspectives here. For example, the next G7, which will be hosted in Japan, has policy briefs and task forces that have come to us at the CGIAR to understand this even more. But my question here is, we sometimes associate the G7 and the Global North with technical development, but sometimes it's considered in isolation of where it really should be developed and deployed. Could you tell us, why should the G7 be coming to talk to us, or the G7 think tank teams be talking to us at the CGIAR as it relates to digital strategy along these problems you just outlined?
Well, it's encouraging to see G7. Well, it's encouraging to see. So it's heartening to see the G7 apparently adopting kind of a more multipolar, view about what they recommend and what they take on. And one indicator of that is building a tighter relationship with G20. But I think also reaching to CGIAR is another indicator of this recognition of a multipolar and increasingly connected world. In terms of what must be done with data and digital, certainly food security and nutrition data as a focus of policy is being elevated across all of the member countries, I'm confident. And it really goes back to this question of shocks and kind of evolving or multifaceted challenges. And if you look at the literature regarding building resilience in supply chains and value chains, on one hand, it can be a bit discouraging because it always seems we learn ways that we should have been more prepared. But there is a signal kind of through there about the value and the importance of communications and rapid sharing of knowledge and facilitating, digitally enabling collective actions around challenges. And so it's heartening to see the G7, adopting this kind of multipolar world view. And I think with data and digital, there are some key capabilities that we need to be building in that way.
Very good point. I heard somebody at the CGIAR recently explain how, our weather, our climate, our Earth by nature doesn't have any borders. And I think it's very interesting that you could almost say that that's very similar with data and digital. It doesn't necessarily recognize political borders or mountainous borders. And this actually has a lot with actually our core mission and how we work, because we don't see borders necessarily in the way we work. So therefore thinking beyond them is going to be essential. And I think what you say here exactly about the G7 thinking beyond itself to see itself operating in a global environment, influencing and being influenced by that is as relevant. I've heard you give an example in the past, for example, about how the EU has passed some law about value chain transparency in chocolate. I think that's another interesting example. Would you like to share that?
Well, it's, so I think my understanding is it will soon become a matter of regulation in the EU, this question of responsible sourcing. And so specifically with cacao, it's being able to show credibly that you are sourcing cacao from places that are not accelerating or contributing to deforestation. And I see it as kind of a part of a larger trend where the intersection of an increase in consumer kind of values and power and interest in shaping how our food systems serve them at the intersection with regulation. And so I see those things as very related, that there will be regulatory requirements to be able to have greater transparency and fairness and coordination in supply chains. And we've got an increased demand from individuals, from consumers.
Absolutely great example. And it makes me even more happy because environmental science and the cacao sector is my scientific origin. So it certainly makes me happy. Xiaowu, I saw you nodding before when we were talking about how data and digital by itself knows no border. And I think this is a really key area that you've been investigating about how digital is naturally a global topic, as is food and water. Could you tell us more about your thinking here?
Yeah, absolutely. So digital is indeed a global topic that influences almost everything we do every day. About 66% of world population use the internet, and the 4G mobile network now covers almost 90% of the global population. I think it's safe to assume there is some form of access to digital technologies in the areas where we live and work already. The digital economy is now estimated as about 20% of global GDP, and digital influences on food, land, and water systems are no exception. Research shows that digital innovations enable more productive, efficient, resilient, and sustainable food, land, and water systems. Family farmers in low and middle income countries can connect to market and financial institutions and access weather and market information to manage risk. And our researchers are working on food systems challenges greatly benefit from digital technologies too. All of our data collection effort, from field trials to household surveys, are done digitally, improving efficiency and accuracy. At a global scale, we now have global land cover mapping data updated every 5 days at 10-meter resolution, and they are all publicly available. These exciting new capabilities give us opportunities to make timely decisions and manage risk across food, land, and water systems.
Timely information and relevant decision making, that's exactly what all of us scientists dream of, isn't it? But it doesn't seem like it's necessarily all at the fingertips when we're all in the last mile at our centers, deep down doing our work. So let's talk about that gap a little bit in the middle. I know you're working on it in the Digital Innovation Initiative. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing? For example, Brian, could you tell us more about digital in the organization, please?
Well, one of the experiences we had through the platform, particularly the innovation process, was to see this vast, potential and diversity in terms of digital work in the organization, and that was true. We estimate that there could be easily 2,000 to 3,000 people across our organization that do some amount of software development. And I think the majority of those people would not consider themselves to be software developers. And so the sort of, essential, quality of working with digital and data it's already with us. And so, and then looking at some of the diversity, there were really great projects that we're integrating computer vision into different aspects, either as part of kind of research, streamlining research methods, or changing how we interface with the wider world. So things like being able to integrate images into how insurance products are managed, or get the the site specificity plus pictures to be able to dial in advisory content over very large scale with many farmers. So these are great capabilities, and researchers are forging ahead with them because they see it as key, I think, to delivering on our mission. But what's been missing, and this came through in the evaluation, has been a kind of coherent whole of organization approach. How do we make sure that there's good alignment between overarching strategy and finite projects that are happening across the organization? How do we surface and understand and build on our commonalities while we allow the diversity of exploration and application and delivery to happen? And so one thing that's evolved over the transition is now we have a digital and data unit a cross-cutting one, and specifically in there, we also have a unit, a subunit on data and digital and data science in research. And so I think, you know, it's harnessing some of the strength of our diversity and building on our commonalities while still enabling our diversity, because you know, we work on very hard problems, and it's great to have different teams with different views how to work on those problems.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating how you say that in our organization, we could have 2,000 to 3,000 people who organically are developing data and digital solutions. It's phenomenal. You can see that obviously the need drove itself before the organization was there, let's say, en masse to bring it together. And what a great opportunity we have with the one CGIAR to actually now bring these worlds together. There could be people who are listening to the webinar today, Brian, where this is really new information. They might have felt like they were the only one, or somebody, you know, at the end of their center working on ideas themselves. But to hear now that they're really among a huge group of people who are thinking similarly, and I agree with you and applaud that we now have this central data and digital organizational area, for example, with a new global director coming. Could you tell us who should be contacted? So if somebody's listening to this webinar and saying, yay, I seem to have colleagues, but I don't really know how and where should they start looking for information, or how can they find a community of practice or their colleagues?
I think, I mean, I serve in that unit, and I'm happy to serve as a point of interface, and certainly through the Digital Innovation Initiative that we work very closely with. There are ways to start to find each other. And I know, in fact, the Digital Innovation Initiative is sort of steward specifically of a community of practice on spatial information. And I think we need other communities of practice around particular areas, such as artificial intelligence. You know, lots of people are very interested in learning more and in contributing more around those themes. And so, you know, what we're seeing emerging now under the Digital and Data Unit, and specifically the subunit related to digital and data in research, is a modality where we pull together essentially product teams, where a group of researchers have a particular need and they want to develop an information product or service. And via digital and data, we find the kind of digital complements to what they're trying to do, and jointly they define, you know, kind of what other functions are needed on those teams. And I think it's really important to underline taking a human-centered design approach to what emerges from that, and designing around the multifaceted human context of the problem that we're trying to solve, rather than necessarily presuming what that product must be. And so, yeah, movement towards fusion teams, cross-functional fusion teams, and human-centered development, human-centered design in the development of solutions is where this is going. And we've started to constitute such teams with the Excellence in Agronomy folks and gene banks, and there's a very interesting market information platform that we've had this engagement on. And so I think it's really the future about how we build on our commonalities and advance them as an organization.
Sorry, I lost you for a moment there. Thank you very much, Brian. I've heard you in the past discuss this organizational aspect as two wings of the plane. And I think that's really key, which brings me, Joe, you are the other. Could you tell us, let's jump down, what are we doing that's digital in research, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let me start by saying we are already digital in many ways. CGIAR is and has been digital already. And I see a question in the chat about AI, and we can't mention, we cannot mention AI without you know, finishing this webinar enough. So there are a lot of opportunities, increasingly available AI and machine learning techniques at your fingertips. Is really our researchers can analyze a large amount of diverse data very quickly towards faster and deeper changes across food, land, and water systems. There's nothing really the AI only AI can do that you couldn't do that before. So even the machine learning, computer vision, maybe there has been already research a smaller scale, you already have those knowledge. Machine is just as smart as the data you feed into and teach what kind of pattern the machine can find too. But what AI can really bring to the table, bring to our research, is doing such analysis very quickly and analyze large data set enormously, almost real time. That provide lots of opportunities, especially for our global challenges. We really don't have much time until 2030. We have very complex research questions and global challenges to address, and AI can really help us get there as faster and accelerated rate. Just give you, for example, a few examples. We recently submit all the initiatives. Submitted our 2022 result to the platform called PRMS. If you are working on any of the initiatives, you might be already familiar with it. We analyze how many of those results are including some element of digital analysis and digital technologies. And there are hundreds of them from more than half of the initiatives. So yeah, this kind of see already we are embedding digital technologies and AI and machine learning as a not really fancy and blue sky tool, but our everyday research tool that we are using to analyze data. We saw some of the examples ranging from like digital extension services and detecting climate change impact and climate adaptation progress, and also identifying, for example, macroinvertebrate in cell phone photos to monitor water quality. So there are some traditional and conventional way of using those big data and machine learning tools. And we were also quite pleasantly surprised, very creative and new way of applying those technology to the conventional way of our research to create a lot of interdisciplinary synergies. So we are really in exciting time.
Absolutely. It's flourishing more than we know. Amanda Rodriguez asked a fantastic question in the Q&A, and Brian, it relates to our next topic about partnerships. So Amanda was asking about funder appetite regarding digital solutions as it relates to digital solutions in agriculture. And I think it paths very well with a new partnership that you'd like to tell us about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you know the open source software Linux, it's ubiquitous. It's a key way in which global digital infrastructure works. It's in data centers and high performance computing facilities. There are laptop versions and so on. And it's open source, meaning communities come together, they contribute code, they collaborate, they contribute cash or in kind around development of this software. And Linux particularly is kind of the most well-known of these software and most ubiquitous probably of these softwares. So we have a partnership with the Linux Foundation specifically to look at the intersection of public goods, in this case, digital public goods, and agriculture. And they bring the breadth and depth and a great track record establishing good governance and co-investment around open source software projects. And we bring the breadth and domain breadth and depth and equally large footprint in terms of where we work in the world. And so I think there were very natural complements in this kind of pre-competitive, yet not opposed to commercial kind of space where, the fundamental foundational things that need to be working better in digital agriculture can. And I think we can show up sort of as who we are in the sense of we value evidence, we value measurement, we continually test our theories of change broadly in our research, and progressively we have a way to apply that related to digital. And so I'm very happy to say that the Linux Foundation and CGIAR have a strategic partnership. I think that gives us more ways in which we can approach contributors to that common vision, public, private, and nonprofit. And we can also work together to provide services back to them, such as sustaining massive, data repositories that our funders want us to sustain, or working with them to source the kinds of innovations that are priorities for them, but then we know how we put them into kind of a pipeline together. And we always know that we've got that public good kind of pre-competitive lens on what we develop together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. I mean, part of that public good is ensuring the do no harm principles, which we know have been very evident around data and digital topics. In our engagement with the G7 think tank, you and Jowu and I and Claudia Sadov have been answering or thinking about some of their questions as it relates to guidelines within this area, things that might, for example, reduce the digital divide that we see, such as gender equality and social inclusion. Do you have some thoughts on this, please, Jowu?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is something really important and crucial as we're moving into this more digitalized organization. Not so many tools are available, especially in these agri-food systems. Unfortunately, there are some tools and guidelines for just general inclusive digital development, but we didn't find not so many particularly available or replicable for the kind of stakeholders we have in lower and middle income countries. And this, to some extent, this is also a data issue. It is not quite easy to find like sex disaggregated data about how people access and use digital services. In many households in South Asia, for example, the family members share devices, and there was a study predicting the gender of mobile users based on their texting patterns. But uncertainty was so high that it was not very practical. And it is also a cultural and very nuanced issue. Even if women appear to be excluded from using digital services, they may still access the services information indirectly through other family or community members. So it's very complex. We saw some globally aggregated statistics and anecdotes everywhere, but I think we have to be careful how we interpret and how we add more research and evidence to that. So within the initiative and also within CGIAR, we are working with other social scientists and gender specialists to study what kind of data and knowledge gap exists. And we also have a work package dedicated to study the measurement of digital divide and how we can estimate the responsiveness in gender and social inclusion space in local digital ecosystems. We have recently published the Rapid Digital Inclusivity Assessment Tool for digital services to help service providers design their digital solution more gender responsive and socially inclusive. But this is just the beginning. I think we have a lot to learn and a lot of data gap to fill. It's really complex, but yeah, equally, it's a very interesting research question. We really should focus more moving forward.
Absolutely. And I guess the way we do it is going to be key. Brian, I heard earlier in our discussion today, you talked about human-centered design. In your opinion, do you think this is one of the ways that we can overcome some of these divides?
It's fundamental good practice, I think, and we do it already, just to underscore, we take on, when we talk about systems thinking and understanding the multifaceted, kind of reality, interaction of social groups and, the underlying thinking related to the Women's Economic Empowerment Index, we already recognize the complexity and the multifaceted nature of the relationship between humans and the problems that they're trying to solve. And so when we want to do something where we aim to be of service, human-centered design, I think, is good practice and essential practice. And this intersects with some of the inclusion and gender empowerment questions that have come up. And I think taking this theory of change approach is one of our unique value adds to the digital space, because sometimes there's this irrational enthusiasm about what these very exciting technologies can deliver. And our researchers understand the nuance, and they understand much more about the systems than many probably do, particularly in the kind of tech space. And so, yeah, absolutely. Human-centered design is the natural complement to the kinds of investigations we already do when we get to the point of developing, a service or a digital product or something along those lines.
Got it. Okay, I can see the value add as it enables our scientists. Like you mentioned something before, irrational hype, did you say? Like some great big trends. Let's address a little bit the elephant in the room. Artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. What does this bring to our field? We've also got a couple of questions in the Q&A. For example, Hector Torban also had a question about the role of AI. So, Brian, how do you address that one?
We're in a very interesting moment where particularly ChatGPT has become a sort of social phenomenon. And, they had 1 million users in the space of 5 days. They got to tens of millions of users in a couple of months. And so it's kind of entered the public consciousness in ways that other generative AI systems have not. And generative AI is the more kind of catch-all term for things like ChatGPT. And those are essentially systems that on limited input can generate things like images or code. You could ask ChatGPT to write you an application and you just give it textual prompts about what you would like the application to do. And so it's very, very exciting, and it presents so many opportunities as a complement to what we develop. Even just the human-centered design kind of set of considerations, it could even help us to accelerate some of those because there's a kind of learning quality in the interaction between computers and humans that this has enabled. I think these things can be embarrassingly wrong. The underlying data can be very bad. Sometimes there are biases in terms of how we interpret the outputs of these, and sometimes there are biases inherent in the outputs themselves. And so I think, human experts in the loop are just fundamentally required to be using these things responsibly.
Absolutely, great point. So therefore, our science and engagement is ever more needed than before. And as you said before, we are trained to be questioning and working with new tools in this way. So as a final wrap up, the last question, the reason that we all started working together a few weeks ago was actually at the response of the G7, who has a think tank that's interested in digitalization and science. And that got us all talking about this in the first place. So the first question that I came to you, which was some weeks ago, what is the call to action to G7 decision makers around this topic, data and digital for the purpose of food, land, and water systems? What have you got to say to them?
I mean, I think this question of pre-competitive / public good collaboration is fundamental. Now that G7 is moving towards a multipolar connected world in terms of trying to arrive at an action agenda, we need to be mobilizing, we need to be aligning public, private, and nonprofit investments, efforts, goods, around enabling digital and data to achieve its full potential for this agility, adaptability, and so forth. And we must do it together. So I would say my call to action would be, co-investment and pre-competitive collaboration, where we enable, we claim the great potential and we mitigate the risks together on data and digital.
Yeah,
fantastic.
I'd like to add, also following the conversation earlier, I mean, the ChatGPT and this kind of AI revolutions are, again, like as smart as the data we are feeding into, and they can grab from. So we really need to continue making effort to ensure our data and all the analysis, including programming code and lots of literature that we are generating, are easily findable, openly available, interoperable, and reusable by many of other human as well as machines. So this effort cannot be really stopped, and we already started the revolution. And unless we make sure all the data and our knowledge product are openly available for the machine to be trained and AI to consume and understand better, we will create more biases, and there might be even more divide in the future. So G7, not only G7, also CGIAR, just call to action is not necessarily new call to action, but just continue making every effort to make our knowledge product and our research and output openly available and accessible and reusable by these kind of applications.
Excellent, Xiaowu. Well, I hear your call to action. Thank you very much. So for anybody who's interested, if you are a budding programmer or you've been working with data and digital and you felt alone in the past, you now know you're not alone. Please reach out to Brian and Xiaowu, or also Khaled Ode, who is our Global Director of Digital and Data at the CGIAR system. There's community of practices, there's funded initiatives, and there's more actions occurring in the future. Thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the best in the digital universe.